Hey there, did you know that this is Animal Crossing's 25th anniversary? I bet that you didn't, because Nintendo likes to give really mediocre celebrations to some of its most beloved franchises. Take a look at Mario's 25th anniversary, where basically all that we got was a ROM of Super Mario All-Stars just on the Wii. Mario's 30th, I guess, was a little bit better with some amiibo, a couple exclusive 3DS consoles, a concert or two in Japan, and then Super Mario Maker, but you know, that was basically it. Mario's 35th, though, we got Super Mario 3D All-Stars and then Mario 35, which was a great game. If only they didn't take it down like 2 months after it released to never be played again. That sucked. And now we're on the 40th anniversary, where we got Galaxy 1 again, which was already on 3D All-Stars, and Galaxy 2, which should have been there in the first place. But wait, we also got a Yoshi game for Mario's anniversary? I guess. There are other celebrations, though. They might be better, I guess, but they still don't amount to much. But yeah, this is Animal Crossing's 25th anniversary, and you know what we got? We got a fart of an announcement on social media, an in-game item, some new artwork, and the release of the original soundtrack on Nintendo Music, which is actually a bigger deal than it sounds like, but regardless of my frustrations though, I'm at least glad that we got some sort of announcement. Animal Crossing as a franchise means the world to me, and it's helped me get through some of the best times as well as the worst times in my life, including middle school, some tough times in college, and obviously the 2020 dark ages. I'm Kylidian, or you can call me Kyle, and Animal Crossing is my favorite game series ever, and Nintendo isn't doing anything to celebrate. So I had to take matters into my own hands. I'm a game composer who's done a lot of work with games like Minecraft, and Animal Crossing has been in my life ever since my first file as Sparky in the town of Tweeville back on September 17th of 2002. My love for the series continues to this day, and despite a complicated history of music for myself, I've always been completely enamored by KK Slider. Saturday nights were meant for browsing through the Nintendo Power Guide, looking for cool sounding tracks to hear KK play in front of the train station. KK Cruisin'? Now that was a night to remember. In college, my friends and I were obsessed with playing New Leaf late into the night for years, and in my adventures in my town of Aston, one night I happened upon Stale Cupcakes. Now, I'm not sure I would go so far as to say the track Stale Cupcakes changed the course of my life, but it definitely played a major role in the years that would follow. This simple track with just a melody and an accompaniment had me completely enthralled. How could something so simple sound so beautiful? And then I had the thought, what would it sound like on an orchestra? At the time, I was the only one who could answer this question. So the next day actually found me in the Central Washington University Music Library, working that afternoon to find out. And the answer that I found led me down the path of becoming a game composer. As I dove more and more into game music, the more obsessed I became with the idea of KK's music. KK Disco, KK Etude, KK Rock. Why did I like these so much? Why was I so interested by them? And then I had the thought, these are tracks that are meant to define genres. KK Disco is the definition of disco music at the end of the day, or at least one person's interpretation of it. But despite all of this thinking about it, I realized that there was one huge, glaring omission. There was no KK Symphony in all of KK's tracks. Nintendo put out a 25th anniversary orchestral CD for Zelda for its 25th anniversary. And in a world of where we're getting now constant orchestral concerts of all sorts of video game music, KK Slider has still not gone to the symphony. So I took matters into my own hands and I took them there. What would a full orchestra concert sound like? How would KK Robot synths sound? What tracks would be programmed? How would KK Disco music that is about disco music sound on a full orchestra? Symphonic Horizons Animal Crossing is my answer to all of these years of thinking and analyzing and loving Animal Crossing and KK's music. You'll hear his music like you've never heard it before, with tons of surprises and fun nods to Animal Crossing, KK, Kazumi Totaka, his real-life counterpart, and also music history along the way. I wanted to take the time today to talk directly to you about how important this album is to me, some of the decisions that I made in writing it, and some of the historical context that I took into consideration in writing this. This is a large, full-scale orchestral album that, although not played by a real orchestra, was written with the intent of if you were to go to the symphony and hear KK's music, this would be it. I'll be breaking down each track individually, and I'll try to keep things short and digestible, but there's a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. I really struggled about what to put first on the album, but I eventually decided it would just feel wrong if it wasn't Forest Life. This is an arrangement of the original Animal Crossing theme, but it doesn't feature the entire melody like you'd hear at the title screen. One of the challenges of this album was how to take these really simple melodies and stretch them out in new creative ways over the course of 3 to at times 6 minutes. I use the melodies through a few rhythm changes and add in a lot of orchestral flourishes at the beginning to mark the start of the concert before transitioning into the theme that you're oh so familiar with at this point. We have a driving rhythm in the strings and woodwinds. I found writing this just so very nostalgic. One thing that I do a lot of actually is taking melodies and really expanding the world of which they exist in. I open this arrangement up in the section after this, giving a unique interpretation before bringing it back around to focus on the bass clarinet marking the main melody again. A flourish similar to the start but more expanded is what brings us back around to the beginning. You might be asking yourself, why start a concert for KK Slider on a piece that wasn't even originally his? And honestly, that's exactly it. We want to mark at the beginning that this is an Animal Crossing concert featuring the music of KK Slider, and what a better way to do it than with the track that started it all. Much like the first track, the placement of the second one was crucial to me because this would be the first point that would mark KK in concert. So I ended up on KK Ballad. It needed to scream, "This is KK Slider," and it needed to do it in a way that was both familiar while new. I opened this with a slower, emotional cello solo, presenting the melody in a much more nostalgic way before a huge flourish brings in the full orchestra, playing with different parts of the main melody. Huge woodwind runs, brass hits, and a massive crescendo into the main track. This is the moment to me that said, KK has arrived, almost as if he was to walk out on the stage. I keep everything pretty standard throughout this one from this point on, focusing on orchestrating out the harmonies before bringing us back around to the beginning, quieter moments once more. Fun fact, I didn't actually really like this track that much until I wrote this arrangement. This was the second arrangement that I wrote for the album, and it's where I think the direction of the album really started to gel for me. To me, this was the first moment that stuck out for me in that I was going to have something that I was really proud of. For the third track, I wanted something fun to hit here, and I knew I wanted a track that was both beloved by everyone and also upbeat to contrast with the ending of Ballad. For me, it was between Disco and Bubblegum. Disco is consistently ranked among people's favorites though, so I wanted to hold my cards on that one, and I decided to put Bubblegum here instead. This is a track that's based on Japanese idol music, and if you know me, you know that I am a huge fan of Japanese idol music. Aqua, my beloved, perfection. I conceptualized this arrangement back in college as well actually, but I never got around to writing it. To me, driving auxiliary percussion was a way to really capitalize on the fun factor of this track, which you can hear after the unison opening with the orchestra. It was absolutely a blast to write this. Rototom's going ham in the background, the trills on the marimba, clinking of the bells, until the orchestra comes in and takes over the melody while the percussion just continues driving in the background. I like to make sure that a lot of the arrangements in this album are able to be presented in a couple ways though, so I brought the intensity down over time. See, part of this track is in minor, so I really wanted to capitalize on that and orchestrate out these moments that could be interpreted a bit more on the melancholy side. Think of it as you accidentally spit your bubblegum on the ground, just to be given a new piece as we're brought back to the beginning again with our percussion. Okay, if you're familiar with KK's song, you know that it's Totaka's song. And if you don't know what Totaka's song is, basically think of it as the theme of Kazumi Totaka, longtime Nintendo composer and the real-world inspiration behind KK Slider. Every game he works on, he sneaks this theme in as an Easter egg. Now, hear me out. Totaka's song is like 15 seconds long, if that. And how long is mine? 4 minutes and 28 seconds. Huh? How? So I knew that for this to really be an album about KK's music, I had to include KK's song on this. But I wanted it to be presented in a way that nobody would ever expect. Take a look at the sheet music for it. This is all it is. It's in C major and then C minor. The fact that this track goes to the parallel key from major out of nowhere is awkward. It's weird, and honestly, it creates a really creepy, unsettling track. And in approaching this arrangement, I had the thought, what would be the funniest thing that I could do here? And I had the realization that in a lot of ways, Totaka's song is historically relevant in that it's passed down like the music of old, from person to person, community to community, or in this case, game to game, which you could liken to folk music. So I had the thought of, what if I wrote this as an old Irish air? And this helped solve a few problems in composition. One of these was the length of the track. To get something lengthy out of 15 seconds, I knew was going to be a challenge. So slowing the tempo down would mean that the 15 seconds would be able to get more ground. The other thing is that it gives the listener more room to be grounded to hear both the melody as well as to forget the melody. I open with a solo playing Totaka's song in full so the melody can be established strongly before bringing in all of the strings at a much slower tempo to play the main melody but reharmonized. And let me tell you, I had to pull out every single trick in the book to write this. I used repeated cells of the melody, or very small snippets to base sections on. I played those cells backwards. I used the melody backwards. I used the harmony backwards. I increased the tempo, increased the dynamics, reharmonized everywhere. I took this piece to truly new dimensions that honestly I didn't even think could exist with something this short. By the end, is it unrecognizable? Absolutely, but every single note in this uses Totaka's song to build an arrangement of it I guarantee you've never heard before. I close out with a much more clear and distinguished playing of the melody once again before we move on to the next track. Alright, some background information on Comrade KK. Us over in the Americas and many other countries probably hear the title of Comrade KK and think of its influence as being rooted in the Soviet Union. But in Japan, this is actually based upon Showa-era popular music called Ryokoka, which combines both Western and Japanese folk music influences. In this case, both references are actually appropriate here. When you look at the cover art, you can see KK has tiny round little glasses. For those of us familiar with Russian classical composers, we might say that he might look like Dmitri Shostakovich. But according to Wikipedia, this could also be in reference to Taro Shoji, who was a famous Ryokoka singer. Who knew? For this arrangement, I decided to focus more on the Russian side of the title since I have some Showa-era inspiration later in the album actually. I decided to go with a more classic form of arrangement here in what's called theme and variations. This is a very standard form throughout classical music, which is, well, to be honest, somewhat self-explanatory. You do hear this form a lot in Russian classical music as well. It's often used to transform existing folk melodies into much larger works. It starts with a statement of the main theme, and then it develops that theme through many variations. This could include things like slowing the tempo down, speeding the tempo up, changing the rhythm, playing the melody backwards, changing the playing style, changing the key from major to minor. The possibilities are truly, truly endless. Mine starts slow, introduces new ideas over time, changes the rhythm, and eventually ends up in kind of a Russian dance-style variation. Fun fact, this was the first track I wrote on the album actually. It's only uphill from here. Alright, and from Russia, we're traveling down south to China. Imperial KK is among my favorite of KK's hits, and while obviously this track is rooted in traditional Chinese music, it does also reference Chinese orchestral music. The Chinese orchestra got its start in the 20th century, and you can kind of think of it as an adaptation of traditional Chinese instruments to Western scales and theory in an orchestra setting. There's a lot of crossover between Western string instruments and traditional Chinese instruments in this ensemble. String instruments like the erhu and gaohu replace the violins and violas, while there's also often Western instruments like the cello, double bass, and timpani. There's a lot of different variations that you might see in this ensemble. The thing instrumentation-wise that really sets it apart and gives it that unique sound isn't just the bowed instruments though, but also the plucked string section. Instruments like the guzheng and pipa, among others, really give it this unique and honestly really cool feel. So fun fact, I actually have a history with writing for Chinese orchestra when I did the Minecraft Kung Fu Panda DLC, so I channeled a lot of that energy from that project here. I used a Chinese orchestra ensemble for this production, and focused a lot on highlighting the erhu and plucked strings especially. You can hear this as early as the opening of the piece. After the melody is played really blatantly in your face, it repeats once before going into a really unique section that, honestly, well, if you don't know what you're listening for, you'll probably lose track of the main composition. I take the melodies and do something similar to what I was doing on KK's song here. I do a lot of backwards playing, cell work, and transformation of the melody and accompaniment to get extra length out of this piece. There's also this downward cascading effect with the plucked strings, which I find to be a really cool effect to provide motion before bringing it to a somber erhu solo, which brings us back to a crescendo to a full statement of the main melody before closing us out on a huge rising section to the end. So one of the tricky parts of this album was thinking about how to find a balance between classic tracks and ones that might be a little less known. Drive-In was a track that was first in New Leaf, but didn't get an air check until New Horizons, so many of you might not actually be that familiar with it. Obviously, this track carries a lot of jazz influence, but there's a bit of debate that I've seen in regards for what the actual inspiration of this track is. The one, though, that I tend to agree with most is Japanese city pop. City pop is a very jazzy, urban feel of music with a lot of its origins and definitions, well, kinda also up for debate, to be honest. The reason why I'm in alignment with this, though, is there is such an aesthetic vibe to city pop. Seriously, just go to Google Images and you'll see all these blues and pinks with urban city landscapes and lots of driving scenes and cars. It's kind of relaxing music that's easy to enjoy, and Drive-In, especially with the rhythms and crunchy harmonies, it really captures that essence of driving a car late at night with the city lights off in the distance. I tried to capitalize on this by really trying to just do a pretty straight orchestration with nothing too out of the ordinary. I focused a lot on the celeste, harp, and other percussion before bringing strings in to make a more bold statement before the repeat, where I bring in more brass. It's such a cool track, and I'm really happy I was able to hopefully put it a bit more in the spotlight here. Marine Song 2001 was actually Captain's song in Dobutsu no Mori Plus, and it was changed in all of the Western versions of the game to be based more on Western sea shanties. So think of this as Captain's original theme, actually. It turns out that a lot of people really like this one, and one of the tricky things about this is how much do you focus on changing really popular tracks versus keeping them the same. The other thing is a lot of this album was just really dense to write. For my own sanity, I had to have a couple that were a bit more laid back. I decided to feature this as a flute solo with string backing. It's a bit more subdued than probably a lot of people maybe expect with how in-your-face a lot of this album is, but having tracks like this is also important. Honestly, if there is a perfectly composed piece of music from KK, I think KK Jongura is it. Jongura is so good that I had to include it. It's a style of Japanese folk music which features the shamisen, which you can hear featured in the air check as a duet between two shamisens. The live version has this duet between the guitar and KK whistling, with an extra section in the piece. I chose to focus this arrangement on the duet aspects while arranging the full composition of the live version. It's high energy, in your face, and really sets the tone of the duet by featuring a lot of call and response by different instruments. And truth be told, this is mostly a straight transcription just put on orchestra because personally I didn't want to touch the composition too much. I really tried to let the orchestration handle the arrangement in this case, highlighting what I thought were cool moments or harmonies. One of my favorite moments is near the beginning when the chimes enter. It's such a statement. You can really start to hear this call and response between the woodwinds in the middle section, while the driving low string staccatos help keep the flow moving. Alright, you really think I would be doing an arrangement album and not be doing Go KK Writer? In my mind, this is one of the most iconic KK tracks there is, and it was one of my favorites growing up. Go KK Writer is inspired by the theme songs of Kamen Rider. I was also a little hesitant to touch this one much, but I decided to break it into a few sections. A full statement of the theme, followed by a restructuring of the theme with accompanying backgrounds, a more somber part, and a build back up to the main theme again. I do feature a lot of brass instruments in this to get that full in-your-face feel. Welcome Horizons was the other track that I had in consideration to put at the start of this album. As many of us are probably aware, this is just the New Horizons theme. New Horizons was by far the most successful Animal Crossing game, so I thought it might be good to put it right at the start for more mass appeal. And that was definitely the original plan. This arrangement was actually the only one, though, that I had to more or less do a full rewrite on. Originally, it was written as a medley of many of the themes of the album, sometimes really blatant, sometimes hidden. It was meant to be kind of like an overture, or a preview of what you could expect a concert to contain. But I changed it for licensing reasons. I tried to keep a bit of this energy, though, by taking it through a few different styles of music. It starts with a full statement of the theme almost exactly like you hear it in-game, before getting into a more grooving section, followed by a slow, nostalgic section. I still try to keep this all as that overview, but I moved it to the middle of the album instead. Think of this as like what starts after the intermission of the concert. And for the last of what I could say maybe are KK covers, I wrote Animal City in two completely different sections with completely different feels. Truth be told, I wanted there to be a third, but I had to cut it for the sake of time since I was deep in the trenches of writing the soundtrack for Null Point Protocol at the time. Animal Crossing City Folk might be the worst Animal Crossing game in my opinion, but I still really love the aesthetics of the city. And this track being literally just the city day theme, I really wanted to make sure that I could capture that feel. So imagine living in the city folk city in a high-rise building. Okay, so there's not really any high-rises, but stick with me. And you wake up and see the sun come over the horizon. The opening section is meant to capture a grand, striking sun hitting the city skyline with the towns in the distance as the animals get about their day, using the melody in new ways to help capture this. At the close of this section, we get a brief pause before we're thrown into the bustling city life. This is a much more straight transcription of Animal City, where I carry the piece once again with orchestration. I use some counter melodies on top of the main melody eventually to really help sell the grandness of this track. It's a really fun arrangement and one that I've been coming back to frequently after writing it just to listen. And like I said, I was hoping to add a section to capture the essence of the city at night, maybe like a jazz or a club style section. Sadly, it's gonna have to remain in concept only. Okay, so KK Cruisin' has been my ringtone on my phone for, I have no idea now, maybe like 18 years. I literally don't know anymore, it's been that long. And once again, this track can only be described as iconic. What's funny about this arrangement is I actually hated it after I finished, and now it's one of the ones that I come back to most often. Kind of funny how that happens. Originally, I meant for it to be more of a jazz combo type thing featuring saxophone, but the more that I got into it, the more that it just started to kind of turn into more or less a Broadway show tune. I guess consider this the closing to Animal City in that case then. It picks up the tempo, adds a lot of driving rhythms, and call and responses among the winds and strings. I added this clarinet solo in the first half with some interplay with the piano that I find really cool before the strings sweep the clarinet up into the orchestration. I keep the rhythms pulsing throughout to keep up that cool factor before the piece closes out. Okay, if you've already listened to the album, you're probably confused by Steep Hill. Let me explain. In my research for this album, I found from Wikipedia that Steep Hill is actually based on Showa-era Japanese folk rock called Kaio-kyoku, and specifically, it shares a melody that is very similar to a popular song of this genre. The title could be referencing a title of a different song that translates to Slope of Nothingness by Masahi Sada. Regardless of what the true track inspirations are, if you look into Kaio-kyoku, you'll find that it's a genre of Japanese rock that aims for a nostalgic feeling through more simple melodies that are meant to be relatable to a normal, everyday life in Japan. I actually went out to listen to the reference song Wikipedia mentioned that might be the inspiration for this, Ichigo Hakusho Omoichido, and they were right. The melody is really similar, and the vibe is really close. If you go to YouTube and read the comments, or translate them like I did, you'll find literally everyone is talking about their youth and how they missed the old days of the Showa era. They're sharing memories of their everyday lives. It was clear how important this music is to so many people out there, and I realized that I should bring this track back home and draw inspiration from this. The likely reference for Steep Hill uses a lot of guitar, so I featured acoustic guitar with a couple of electric guitar solos somewhat like the original, while I put the singer, for lack of better terms, on a solo violin with string backing for the orchestra. I find it to be a simple, yet hopefully stateful arrangement that people will be pleasantly surprised by. KK Bashment goes back to the question of how do I pick new KK music and justify putting it in the album over so many classics that didn't make the cut? Well, the answer at the end of the day is that all of the music is important. Bashment was added in the New Horizons 2.0 update, so it's possible that a lot of you missed this track actually. When I was picking the track list, I was so enamored with the simplicity. Go listen to both the live and the aircheck versions. They're both so good, especially the live. It's got this feeling that really reminds me of being 16 again for some reason. As I was going through comments on YouTube of the aircheck, a few people were mentioning that it reminded them of Wii or 3DS music. Others were reminded of lobby music. The comments about Wii music, though, struck home for me. It's obviously not exactly that style of music, but I found that it captures a lot of the memories I get when I think about things like the Photo Channel, Weather Channel, or Check Me Out channels on the Wii. It was a time in my life where I didn't know where I was, who I was, or what tomorrow would bring. And after this realization, I knew I had to include this track, and that I couldn't touch it too much. I needed it to capture that vibe. So I kept the orchestration a bit more simple, both to help this feel, and to be a little more relaxed before we go into the last fourth of the album. KK Robot Synth Now might be my favorite of all of KK's tracks, and I have no idea how I missed it when it came out. Well, I do. It was also in the 2.0 update of New Horizons. When I heard Robot Synth, though, I legitimately got so excited because I knew what had to be done, and I didn't know if anyone other than me would be crazy enough to do it. I love Vocaloid music. I absolutely love it, and KK Robot Synth is a song that is literally just Vocaloid. You can look at KK on the album art and see that he's dressed as Kaito, with some Miku thrown in as well. Vocaloid got me through some of the hardest times in my life back in community college and early university. I'm not sure what it was about Miku and the people who wrote her music, but I became absolutely obsessed. I still am. Here's a picture of me at Miku Expo this year. Okay, so weird transition, but when things are hard, I like to go lay down in the grass on hot summer nights and look up at the stars. Back in college, I lived at this place that was right next to a small hill with plenty of grass, and so many nights in the summer would I grab my headphones, stare up at the sky, and listen to Vocaloid music that was emotional. These are some of the musical moments that still stick out to me to this day, just looking up at the sky for hours while listening to Miku. And I knew that for this track, I needed to personally indulge and not write the track people wanted to hear, but the one that I wanted to hear. I wanted a slow, emotional track that I could stare at the night sky to, taking me back to the time when honestly I conceptualized this album. But we have two problems. KK Robot Synth is a higher energy, peppy Vocaloid track, not a slow emotional one. It focuses on the upbeat side of Vocaloid music. Unlike a lot of KK music though, this track is written very clearly in verse, chorus, and bridge-ish format, meaning we have a full song on our hands. And I knew with that, it would be much easier to take the full song and slow down the tempo to get a full through composed track, one that would be the emotional journey I was looking for. Now our second problem is how do we stay true to Vocaloid? Well, there could only be one answer. This is Vocaloid. We needed a vocalist, but it couldn't just be any vocalist. We needed a specialist. We needed Miku. Miku is an instrument actually, and you can buy her. So I went out and bought her and set out to learn the Vocaloid software. And let me tell you, working in PA Pro Studio was tough. Miku V6 wasn't out yet. I was still on V4X, and man, I have a strong PC, but this program sure struggled. But with a lot of perseverance, I finally got what I was after. And to use Miku, I painstakingly took KK Robot Synth, I slowed the tempo way down, and wrote out every single Animalise lyric KK sings. Yes, it really sucked. So I plugged these into the software for Miku, and I found that a lot of the vowels didn't work too well because of the way the Japanese language works with the software, so I had to tailor and edit them a bit. I took this arrangement though and did every possible thing I could. Not only did I slow it down, but I have really quiet emotional sections, massive orchestral flourishes, huge strings, and Miku soaring above a full orchestra as if she was at the front live in concert. You can hear the main melody featured very prominently, but I assure you that you've never heard it like this before. In the climaxes, I play around and break up the melody into cells. I grab portions from here and there and send this track to places that even I didn't think I could take it. Honestly, to me, there's a few tracks that I consider to be flagship tracks, and this is definitely one of them. I really hope that you love this one as much as I do. KK Bossa comes up in discussions all the time about people's favorite KK track as being one of the most popular ones. And again, it's hard to know how much to change these without a good reason. I decided to focus more on just orchestrating the track out without changing too much, just so that the people who really love this track would have something more in alignment with what they know and love. It's fairly standard, some interplay between brass, woodwinds, and the strings, and it keeps the driving pulse of the rhythm. And I make sure to have the opening feature a solo flute, since it's often a fairly prominent lead instrument in bossa nova. And likewise, if you watch ranking videos or read discussions on KK's most popular music, you will almost always see KK Disco listed in S tier, and for good reason. This track has it all: grooving rhythms, a fantastic melody, great harmony, and a more interesting compositional structure than many of KK's other tracks. If you remember back many tracks ago, I said that I wanted to maybe put this in the place of where Bubblegum was at, but I decided on saving Disco for near the end. The love this track commands among the fanbase to me was reason alone to put it here. I keep a lot of the groove that you hear in the original, but I orchestrate it out in new ways. It opens with big hits until woodwind runs take us into the core melody. Throughout most of this track, there's a driving piano rhythm which holds down the honestly pretty unique accompaniment of the original. It's one of those things that can be felt, but not always necessarily heard. Eventually, though, I take us into a percussion break somewhat similar to what I did on Bubblegum actually, just maybe not quite as intense. I use the celeste to play around with the melody a bit here before I bring the strings back with brass hits for the bridge. A string feature brings us back around to a trumpet, leading us into a key change where I mix up different parts of the track back to back to help drive in what came before. Changing around the melody a little to help extend out this arrangement I found to really help take us to the end. It's around this moment where if you listen closely, you can start to hear the piano poke through more. When the big held out chords hit, that's where the piano really begins to make its presence known. And I know that many people don't like 11th chords and instead opt for the sharp 11, but I love the crunchiness and passive resolutions that the natural 11 brings us. It gives us a little bit of extra oomph to the ending. I love it. Okay, real talk. Am I the only one who thinks KK metal sucks? The melody is da-da, 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 da-da. Then you have an arpeggiated guitar solo? There's so much complexity to metal music that I feel this track could have just done so much more with. Then eventually in the bridge, you get to this really awkward section of chords that just feels completely out of place. No melody or anything. The live version only makes it worse too. The whole track is also just short, with the air check being like 25 seconds or something until the loop point. So how long did I make mine? Wait, 6 minutes? That's the longest track on the album. So I set out with one goal in mind: to make this track not suck. This was the last arrangement I did on the album, and I saved it for the end because I knew this one was going to be tough. I couldn't rely on slowing the track down though, like I did for KK Song. No, metal music needs to be driving, in your face, high octane, or as my buddy Mugen puts it, like sticking a fork into an outlet, visceral. But thankfully, I had a plan. My favorite album of all time is S&M by Metallica. Something about Metallica and a symphony just really, really works. It heightens my favorite band to what I find to be absolutely new levels. It makes all of their music sound brand new, fresh, with tons of new and interesting parts. In writing this, I had to pull out every single stop in making KK Metal not suck. I didn't have much to work with, but even still, there's through lines and commonalities that I could use. Notes might outline the core melody, while slower sections might outline harmonies. I changed the rhythms at times to provide more variety to otherwise what would be a really stagnant 6 minutes. After the strong statement of the opening, which features a lot of the very first note of KK Metal, and hitting the second note at times, the first section is slower, with string backgrounds, trading clarinets, horns, and oboes. This drives us to huge hits of a metal band blasting through the orchestra as strings scream high and the horns soar in the background. The guitar hits hard, finally playing the main theme. The low strings plug away at staccatos until the strings echo the guitar on the main melody while winds and violas scream on scales in the background. I evolved this over time through harmony changes before we approach another slower section where instruments trade off again. The main melody once again being outlined by key tones. You'd really have to dig deep to find it though. We reach an emotional climax of this before being brought back in by the bass guitar to a triplet section while the strings play a new rendition of the main melody on a triplet figure. This whole section grows to be the biggest climax of the entire album, which brings in the lead guitar solo, at which point the orchestral backing for the solo, for the first time in over 4.5 minutes, does the full orchestra finally play the main melody. And that awkward section that I mentioned about the harmony with the weird bridge, yeah, that sucks and it's in this part. So again, I wanted to make it not suck, but man, did I have to change the voice leading and get creative here. The flow is just so weird. And we hit the end of that section as I bring the harmony back around again to bring us into the first main rendition of the melody that you heard, just with a way stronger presence this time. The driving low staccato strings push into our final moment of the main melody before the whole orchestra hits a huge chord and final flourish. I put a ton of thought into this track, but honestly, the fear that I had starting out came true. It was fine. Just fine. But I knew ahead of time that this was going to be the case. And I had a solution. Once again, like Miku, I was going to need a specialist. I needed a metal band. So I hit up RoPanugantiand, metal expert, and asked him to help co-write and produce on this. He did guitar, bass, and program drums, and let me tell you, when he sent me the files, I was blown away, and it was the track that I was looking for. But rather than me tell you about his work, let's have him tell you himself. Take it away, Ro.
KK Metal is one of the songs that I've seen a lot in the arranger scene because obviously Animal Crossing, this cozy game, a lot of like chill music, acoustic instruments, and then your iconic KK slider, like the character, has this one track that is like kind of emblematic of fast thrash 80s metal. So of course when Kyle brought me on, I was really excited. I think we have a shared love of like Metallica and like these kind of classic high energy bands, and I wanted to see what I could do to kind of co-arrange where I take on like the guitars and the bass guitar and the drums and see what they should be doing to complement that. One of the best references, of course, is the album Symphony and Metallica S&M, which has this really cool effect on me. Growing up with mostly classic rock and symphonic music was brought up in cartoons and like maybe certain famous classical pieces. I had never heard a metal band and symphonic elements together, and since then I've seen so many different forms. Obviously Symphony and Metallica 2, but Steve Vai plays with an orchestra, Yngwie Malmsteen plays with an orchestra. It's become like a really cool staple. I wanted to bridge a lot of that. Folks who love symphonic music, or Animal Crossing for that matter, but maybe don't know too much about rock music and metal, I wanted them to know what makes it special to me. So that can be some of the energy and like the aggression you hear in the picking and like the speed of it all, and some of just the haphazard nature. I think that comes through really well. This was also a really good chance to kind of showcase the variety of metal that works well with symphonic. So I thought of things like, what kind of riffs work well. And so you hear that like a lot of those chugs are meant to stay in the lower register. I think that's really important. Another area that was really fun is, so Metallica is very famous for, playing maybe standard tuning and like maybe in the frame of today's metal world, a lot of their conventions are since, not as common anymore. People tune down, they go crazy, and we picture like Metallica and thrash metal as a whole. We picture thrash metal as kind of a safe standard. Now I think it's fun because the KK metal arrangement itself is in drop C to match the orchestra playing in C minor, and that let me pull out some of the sort of Saint Anger age of Metallica. You have these kind of like boom down dun 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 dun, which is almost like a subtle nod or influence from some of their riffs on that album. Even though like a lot of people kind of feel divided, I think there was something really cool about bringing that. I also recorded it all on my PRS SE Mark Holcomb model, which has these really cool Seymour Duncan pickups. The voicing scoops into like the tone really well, and you get the grit of the guitar and pre-EQ'd sound that's really, it's got character and flavor, whereas a lot of pickups maybe don't have that anymore. They leave it sort of flat, and then you have to spend more time sculpting it out the way you like it. I think one of my favorite parts of the whole track, of course, is the guitar solo. No surprise there. I wanted to channel a little bit of Kirk Hammett and some of the wilder solos that came out of the 80s, where you're just throwing all sorts of, cool licks here, blues here, like some melodic minors and some runs, and just what would it feel like if you were just performing music? And I think that's something you'll hear, especially with like the raw of it all, and maybe like the subtle inspiration from different eras of thrash metal. One of the things I think is important in the video game music scene is to collaborate with people that are very different from you or write different kinds of music and find ways to bridge that. That can be one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of being in the game music scene. Working with Kyle Zizi, he's fantastic. I love his other work, so I can hear the artist voice in the arrangements. You're listening to a completely new song than the original KK Metal, arrangement you'd hear in the game if you got the exact CD. That's something I think really motivated me, finding someone who's ambitious and isn't afraid to give feedback or try something new and really poke at this song until it's this perfect thing. The end result was hard to mix. It was hard to edit together and get just right. But as I listen back to it, I feel like it's such a cool crossover of our worlds. And if you don't like metal, but you love Animal Crossing, I think you might like it. If you don't like symphonic and chamber kind of musics, I think the energy from the metal side will come back, and we'll have the universal language that we love these games. Yeah, Animal Crossing for me is a really fun kind of history. While I don't normally play these kind of relaxing, cozy games like maybe I should more, I found that the early Animal Crossing games latched onto me well because there was a little bit more follow through. There was no multiplayer. You kind of had to play single player by yourself and explore the town. And I remember borrowing Animal Crossing for the GameCube from a friend when I was living in Japan. And thankfully I could set the language to English and I wasn't worried about that. But the characters were all talking to you about different things. You had these little mini missions and collectibles, and you would find yourself kind of moving in this game very comfortably. There's not a million things to do, but there are a lot of things you can kind of naturally explore and stumble upon, and you end up reflecting really well. One day I went and I found this really weird fossil or fish or something. KK was kind of special, especially around Wild World. I think I remember in my calendar that I've got to be there at Saturday and check this one thing out, and then he'll give you the music he played. In a lot of ways, that's kind of how music works now. You get handed music when you really show up to it, and it becomes this rewarding, one-time special experience. When you check out this album, I think you're gonna have a very symphonic adventure that you've reached your hands out to grab and get. And there's some sweet songs, there's ballads, there's some funny kind of tracks almost. And they have that quirky edge that I think Animal Crossing and Totaka is known for. And then you get KK Metal.
And at the end of the day, by our powers combined, we had done it. I find myself going back to this one all of the time. It's an absolute blast to listen to, and I hope that you love it as much as us. And at the end of this night at the Symphony, we end right where I began, with stale cupcakes, unchanged from my original version 11 years ago. You can find my original Sibelius export on YouTube still, actually. It really is what started this journey for me. And this arrangement closes the book on what started as a simple question, but turned into so much more than I could ever have imagined. And I'm ready to turn the page and move to the next chapter. I wanted to hear a full concert of KK's music, programmed as if KK programmed it himself, but I didn't know what to do. There's a few others of us out there who've put KK's music on orchestra before, but there's not many of us. There's only a few arrangement albums in existence. There's really not that many. I partnered with my good friends at Materia Collective to help bring this album to life, and without their help, none of this would have been possible, and you all have my eternal thanks. And if you want to listen to the album yourself, all of us involved would greatly appreciate it. I have Spotify and Bandcamp links down below. The 25th anniversary of Animal Crossing, at least at the time of making this video, may have just come and gone with a quiet announcement from Nintendo, but honestly, this series means way too much to me to let that be it. And maybe one day I'll be able to see KK in concert. But at least right now, to me, he's already made it. I put my heart and soul into this, and I really hope it resonates with Animal Crossing fans across the world. Happy 25th Animal Crossing. Let's enjoy it together.